Every single corporate event that we do is started with a DocuSign signature. We add signers, adjust the fields, add the signature tag. They opened it, they signed it, they send it back to us, and within Miss Alexis on Stupid. Most jobs promises the world. The Navy delivers. See your recruit birds away. Navy. It's not just a job. It's an adventure. Miss Alexis on Stupid. Starts you with $288 and another housing is free. You get 30 days paid vacation leave. What are you going to do with it? $288 every month.
I'm a curious person. I like to know what's going on and why. That's why I chose a career in journalism, where I can always be on the top of things. I got my start in a 10-week Army photojournalism course, the equivalent of 2 years of college. And since my training, I've been able to work in radio and television, as well as in journalism. The Army is giving me a chance to really learn my profession, limited only by my imagination and ability. It's not a bad deal.
Want to find out how you can join people like Kayla Stokes? Call or visit your Army representative.
The fate of Lyndon Johnson did haunt Richard Nixon. He felt he had to demonstrate that most Americans still supported him, and that it would not benefit Hanoi to stall peace negotiations. Don't get rattled. React.
Hi, I'm Nicole Hockley from San Diego Promise. I know this is hard to hear, but it's important. The shooter had foreign TV. The world is thinking.
So, as you know, the famous quote is by Richard Nixon. He was being interviewed by David Frost a few years after he left the presidency, and Nixon said something along the lines, "If the president does it, it's not illegal." I certainly don't agree with that. And actually, the Lincoln Emancipation Proclamation example, I try to use to prove my point. I mean, the president's power extends as far as, and here I don't disagree with Bob, we just disagree with the line is, it extends as far as the power goes. So just because the president's commander-in-chief and we're in a war doesn't mean he could nationalize healthcare. It's not related to the fighting of a war. The Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves only in the areas of active fighting. Lincoln actually did not think he had the constitutional power to free the slaves in the North. And he was actually so worried about it that he really pressed for the enactment of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution while he was in office, because he actually thought when the war was over, he as president would have to return all the slaves to their owners. And so I think that's how I would think of it too, is that, the president says commander-in-chief or to protect the country. He has the power, but it has to be reasonably related to what he wants to do. What Nixon's problem was that he was using his national security powers to follow his domestic political enemies who are completely unlinked to any foreign threat. Second, just go ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt.
The second short answer is just given that's the line, presidents often, Bob made this point in his talk, will cross that line. There's no guarantee we'll always have good people as president. We certainly haven't had good people all the time as president. I guess the question is, do you think you could write a legal code out in advance to bind the president down so that never happens at the cost of losing the flexibility that allowed Washington and Lincoln and FDR to succeed? I think I'd rather rely on the political process. Congress to use its own powers in the midst of it to take care of it. Nixon, after all, was removed by the threat of impeachment. Andrew Johnson, who's fought with Congress about Reconstruction, is basically run out of office under impeachment. I think the political process actually does respond when people in Congress generally want to use those powers.
If I could just add and follow up to what just the immediate prior point that John was making, that he doesn't mean to say, and I certainly agree with him on this, that a president making decisions as commander-in-chief could not do whatever the president wanted. There has to be some relationship to him serving as commander-in-chief. The problem, though, is the way the current environment and the last two administrations, or certainly the prior administration.
Okay, so there is the most famous, I think you might see this. Have I been showing this to you? Or maybe you missed it. Maybe I forgot to share it with you. This maybe the most famous Korean American today is Jonathan Yu, who is a law professor at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, one of the top schools in the United States. And he's notorious because he wrote the legal memos for the George W. Bush administration, because I think he was advising or working in the George W. Bush administration after the September 11, 2001 attacks, writing out legal justifications for use of what were called enhanced interrogation techniques. Enhanced interrogation techniques, which the more popular term for that is torture. The torture people, individuals arrested, captured by U.S. military in Afghanistan or kidnapped in other countries that U.S. intelligence agencies have identified as jihadists supporting terrorism, terrorist attacks, preparing terrorist attacks in the future, or having participated in organizing and carrying out terrorist attacks against the United States and U.S. targets in the Middle East, against like the USS Cole ship off the battleship, Navy ship off the coast of Saudi Arabia, off the coast of Yemen, the attacks in the United States in September 11, 2001. He wrote the legal justifications that could be that were used to justify use of what were called so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. So if you're interested in him, you can find lots and lots of material about him, and that leads us to our topic today. I'm talking to you from from the hotel where I'm at in New Orleans for the conference that I'm attending of the Association of Slavic East European Eurasian Studies. So the Zoom link is a little bit slower maybe than it is in Korea, because I'm quite distance away from Korea right now, and so let me make sure that I don't forget that we need what we need to do, and that is the attendance. So let me go to U.S. Foreign Policy class and do the attendance, and the attendance, smart attendance number for you is 165. 165 is your smart attendance number. So let me put that in the chat, 165. And okay, so there we go. And so let me again remind myself what we're doing today. And so we have a student debate. So that means we need to have enough time left for, we have to devote enough time to for the debate, so that we make sure we give everybody enough time to speak fully as much as they need to or want to talk. And so to South Koreans, one person's terrorist and another person's freedom fighter. And So let me see again what else I have here in terms of my notes that I want to present to you today. And let me make sure I find those materials before we go to our debate. And I think we should just go directly to the debate, and so that we make sure we cover all of that. And so let me open up the notes. And for Chapter 10, National Security and Defense Policy. And let me also see what I have here in terms of the vote activities I have planned for you today. And yeah, just we're focused on the debate. So let's go back to. Okay, so now I haven't looked at your paragraphs yet because I've been here at this conference. So I will look at those obviously soon, and then give you my feedback on your paragraphs later. But let me go back to the lesson plan and make sure I'm sharing the screen with you here. So share screen. And so let me ask Jaewon Kim Jaewon, and Chun Hyo Kyung, are you prepared? If you are prepared, hopefully you are prepared. I will make the screen share available to multiple participants. So if both of you or either of you have material you want to share to everybody on the by sharing your screen, you can, like a PowerPoint presentation or a Microsoft Word file. And since I'm not in the debate, I can keep time. And so let me again, let me share the screen. And here you go. And let's see. So Kim Jaewon will speak first. And let me set my clock up here. And everything seems to be kind of, okay, clock, timer. So Pro speaks for 6 minutes maximums at the start, and then Khan also rebuts for 6 minutes, and then Pro rebuts for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and then Khan rebuts and concludes for up to 7 minutes, and then Pro has the last word for 3 minutes. So, and you can ask a question and get extra credit participation if you want to. Okay, so Kim Jaewon, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, so, and do you have anything that you want to show, share the screen with? Okay, I see you have started screen sharing and I'm waiting. Okay, we see it. I see your screen. Okay. And so when you're ready, you can start. You can start.
Yes, today's topic, South Koreans, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. I'm on the pro, since I focused on the matter of interests, not on the justification argument. I think that the act of terrorism occurs when a certain group gets stuck on achieving their political purposes by something more powerful and more influential than themselves. For example, a 9/11 terror was committed by the Islamic terror groups as a resistance to the more powerful power of the United States, and also any kind of armed riots or protests by the anti-government force can also be the kind of terrorism. And there are many more kinds that can be seen as terrorism, but what those have in common is that there is a clear relationship between one powerful force and the challenging force, and that could be also called as terrorists. Speaking of terrorism, we need to focus more on what the terrorists represents, and if they're fighting for freedom, they could be named as a freedom fighter. So I came up to my own definition that the concept of terrorist could be named after any person or a specific group who fights at the front line for their organization, whether to protect or achieve what they value. But this does not mean that it applies in every cases. For example, it excludes such cases like aimless terrorism or terrorism due to simple hatred. Like KKK is an example of what I just spoke about, terrorism of simple hatred. Like they were the white supremacy racist group, and what they did was lynching the black people simply by hatred. And this has nothing to do with fighting for freedom or gaining political interests because they were already the majorities during that period. That is why I mentioned that my state does not include every cases. Uh, and in our country, Korea have so many typical kinds of cases when speaking about freedom fighter because Korea had colonization history. So I brought some of the most representative historical people. One of them are An Jung-geun and the other is Yoon Bong-gil. They both were Korean independence activists, but they had different purposes in which the first person, An Jung-geun, planned only to kill one core Japanese general while the other, Yoon Bong-gil, threw a bomb targeting many people. Those commitments, especially for case of bombing, it was the revolutionary act for us, the Koreans, but in the Japanese point of view, could be also seen as a sort of terrorism. But however, as Koreans share the same consensus of their sacrifice as one of the symbol of freedom fighting, at least for this case, the term of terrorism and freedom fighter are not two different things to be discriminated. So to arrange my words, in some specific cases which have casual relationship, terrorists could be also seen as a freedom fighter. This was my opening statement.
Okay. Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask for Pro? And if you do not yet have a question, Pro will speak twice more. So please, you can raise your hand, use the reactions, or send a message in the chat box to let me know that you want to ask a question, and you can ask a question. Okay. So then we will then go to the con side to speak, and the con side is Chon Hyuk-young. Okay, we can see it. You can start.
Good morning. My name is Chun Hyuk-young and I'm Con. One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. What I want to say in this proposition is that terrorists and freedom fighters cannot be the same person. In other words, it cannot coexist. I think there is an objective basis for judgment that can divide the fighter of freedom with terrorists. The objective criterion that determines the behavior of terrorism and freedom fighter, in my opinion, is these three. First, the object of violence. Second, the means of violence. Third, the existence of clear arguments that justify behavior. Let's take the September 11 terrorist attacks as an example. Are those who attacked America fighters of freedom? Attacks on the World Trade Center are not a place for justice fighters to target. Some might point out that they were against capitalism and that the Trade Center symbolized capitalism. However, Bin Laden's terrorism is not anti-capitalism. The Taliban, which advocates Bin Laden, is actually a force that fought a desperate war with Soviet communism for 10 years. Seeking their core going out of way, perhaps religious illusionism would be likely to be closest. How can you explain the reality that almost 1,000 citizen victims in third world countries, including Indians, Mexicans, Filipinos, and Turks, were targeted at the United States? In the case of US Department of Defense, it might be appropriate as a target. However, in order to become a freedom fighter, the second and third requirements mentioned here must also be in line with the action. As for the means of violence, nothing was as cheap as cruel as the September 11 terrorist attacks. Now it's hard for anyone in the world to travel by plane with confidence. An unspecified number of people have suffered psychologically. Finally, September 11 terrorists are busy denying that they did not do it, let alone justify their actions. I think only those who can clearly and logically reveal what they acted violently can be treated as a fighters of freedom. For this reason, I define terrorism as unethical violence against an unspecified majority, and the fighter of freedom is defined as a person who sacrifices himself for a cause with good intentions. There are many purposes of terrorists so far, but most of them have been agitation and threats. Among them, I think that the fact that it induces the state's violent retaliation against terrorism, not accepting their demands, highlighting the difference between terrorists and freedom fighters. Strong evidence is that the background of the September 11 terrorist attacks is intended to induce US military intervention to remove the mask of Middle Eastern forces cooperating with US factions and organizations. Therefore, I think we need to approach terrorism that threatens our safety from the perspective of simply looking at it as a crime and from the perspective of an act of war. If we define terrorism as an act of war, terrorism is improper to Thomas Aquinas' just war doctrine. None of these four are consistent. Terrorists did not use peaceful means, the cause is unjustifiable, and they are not directed by sovereign government. Terrorism is just unilateral violence against an unspecified number of people. It can also be said to be a threat to democracy in that it ignores all the customary postures of representative politics. In conclusion, freedom fighters deserve to be clearly distinguished from terrorists. That's all.
Okay, does anybody have a question? Nobody has a question. Oh, okay. If nobody else has a question, then Pro can now rebut. So Jaewon Kim Jaewon.
May I have a minute to think about what she said? Just for 30 seconds.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know, I'm thinking about what my professor 40 years ago told me in graduate school. This is before, obviously, September 11, 2001 attacks, about what the purpose of terrorists were. And the purpose of terrorists, the aim of terrorists was to, and this was, of course, during the time of Palestinian so-called terrorism and other attacks, you know, against civilian targets, was that basically it was to generate a reaction from US and Western governments to put more pressure on their Arab allied government regimes. They're the allies of the Arab allied governments of the United States, like Jordan, Saudi Arabia. For the US government to react to these terrorist attacks, putting more pressure on those traditional American allied regimes that were conservative, traditional, archaic type, kings and sheikhs regimes, and also Egypt, to put pressure, the American government to put pressure on those governments to crack down or suppress more the activity of militant activists in their societies, whether they be Arab nationalists or political Islamists, to crack down even further and suppress those activists in these already authoritarian governments, with the aim then being that that would then cause these governments to become unstable. That these governments, because they were being pushed by the Americans to crack down on political Islamists and others, that they would become unstable, and they would therefore have to become more assertive and supportive of Palestinian rights in order to stabilize their regimes, as the Americans are cracking down, pushing them to crack down on and suppress even further political militants and Islamists in their societies, that they would then have to respond by being more supportive of the Palestinians because of the sensitivity of the Palestinian issue in the Arab world. So this is talking about nationalism 35, 40 years ago. I mean, terrorism 35, 40 years ago. And there's probably an element of that still at work today, that basically the intent is to push the United States to act in ways that expose the close alliance, but unofficial, hidden, informal, covert alliance of, for example, the Saudi royal family, the Jordanian royal family, the Kuwaiti royal family, all those traditional royal ruling families. They are officially supportive of the Palestinians, but they don't do very much. And the aim was to put more political pressure on them by terrorist acts, provoking the United States, and in ways which would demonstrate or more clearly illustrate to the rest of the world to the extent to which the Saudi royal family really, for example, despite their claims of protecting Muslims and being protective of Muslims, that they really work for the Americans. That the Americans, and even since I've been in Korea, I mean, I come across elements of reports in that regard. For example, in the New York Times, reporting that, for example, the most important American representative office in Saudi Arabia is not the US Embassy, it's the CIA station chief. It's not the US ambassador, it's the CIA representative in Saudi Arabia. Because the Saudis, they cooperate, but they don't want to be seen cooperating closely with the Americans because of hostility from public opinion, from nationalist Arab and Islamist public opinion. So, Islamists, they see, and Arab nationalists, they see a triangle of support between the United States government, Israel, and the conservative Arab regimes, like the Saudi royal family, the Kuwaiti royal family, the United Arab Emirates royal families, the Moroccan government royal family, to control the area for the Middle East, so that the Americans can particularly get access to the oil and control the area. But that's their worldview. Of course, the United States also is perceiving a threat from political Islam and pan-Arabism. And so you see, for example, Trump, the Trump administration pushed Morocco, United Arab Emirates, and other regimes, conservative, traditional, feudal, aristocratic type regimes, to make recognize Israel, because the Trump administration basically concluded the Arab nationalism is dead. There is no such thing as Arab nationalism, in their view. Pan-Arabism, it doesn't really exist. So they don't have to really worry so much about pan-Arab or pan-Islamic public opinion reacting. And so far, we haven't seen evidence that that's wrong. The Trump administration promotes the what they call the Abraham Accords, because Abraham in the Bible is the father, the progenitor of Jews, Muslims, of Jews and Muslims. The Abraham Accords, with the recognition by United Arab Emirates of Israel, and Oman of Israel, and Morocco of Israel. And there has not been so far a nationalist hostile public reaction that's destabilized these regimes. And as I told you, I mean, even Egypt appears to be, Pan-Arabism appears to be weaker than we had thought in Egypt. Egypt is an Egyptian nation state. It's got serious economic problems, vulnerabilities, but so does South Korea. And South Korea succeeded. Maybe Egypt is counting on aid and the development from the European Union, United States to do something similar. I mean, Arab identity is important in Egypt, but their primary identity is Egyptian, not Arab, apparently, from their collective behavior. Okay, Kim Jae-won, you can go now.
Okay. First of all, I agree what you said about the 911 attack, but it was hard to think of any cause for their cause, any attacks. So I would say that this event was a unique one. I thought about their cause as the religious integration about the Middle East or resistance to the American world power, but America didn't quite suppress their religious freedom or using military economic power. So I couldn't think of any reasonable cause about that. But about the just war doctrine, I would say that terrorism itself is not a war, but it could be led to war before then. It is not an official war. So I think that it is not appropriate to apply those kind of international rules. But I agree that terrorism is a serious crime, but I didn't think of the standard as justification of terrorism. I took the standard with the public interest and what those terrorists stand for. Also, when talking about how much they can present their group interests, I think that terrorists could be the freedom fighter for their group. What I mean is that uh, the discrimination between these two concepts is quite vague because it is, if it goes to uh, legal legitimacy issues, the murder caused by An Jung-geun and Yoon Bong-gil could also be treated as criminals. That's all what I have to say.
Anybody have a question? Like any Korean student have something to add regarding these two individuals that the speaker Kim Jae-won is mentioning? Pro will speak one more time. Khan will now speak for the last opportunity. So Khan, you can begin.
Okay. Speaking about the individual you mentioned, An Jung-geun was a martyr against Japan for national self-determination during the Japanese colonial era. In Japan, they are called terrorists, but they had clear arguments that justified the object, means, and actions I mentioned earlier. He is respected as a martyr, not a terrorist, for targeting accurate political targets. The means of violence chosen by An Jung-geun was also justified. Pistols and lunchbox bombs manufactured by the Chinese were legitimate weapons to soothe the resentment of the people of a small and weak power. There were no innocent victims to prepare for this violence. Also, An Jung-geun was a righteous army. Considering that the Japan has caused numerous wars and robbed and crushed Korean people, It's a military activity for Koreans to kill the head of Japan, the enemy as a rightist army. It's not a single individual terror. For this reason, I think Anjungun can be called freedom fighters, not terrorists, in the fairness of action. And also, mm, you mentioned about the concept of terrorists can be named after someone or group who mm, uh, fights at the forefront to protect or achieve what they value. So I will argue in more detail in this in cause of 9/11 attacks. There will be people who give a justifiable reason for any terrorism or murder that occurs in the human world. Hitler, Mussolini, Hideki Tojo of Japan, Hussein of Iraq, and Gaddafi of Libya will all be able to justify their violent aggression and terrorist acts. Um, of course, the basis for judging such violent acts is always distorted by race, thought, and ideology. Um, in the past, traditional terrorism was so political that terrorists could be recognized as fighters of freedom, that their actions were even recognized as political means. However, as mentioned earlier, there is a clear criterion for distinguishing between freedom fighters and terrorists. Terrorism, which has spread rapidly around the Middle East since the 1970s, has turned into a political purpose unclear, and the method of terrorism is no longer like a fighter of freedom. In the past, traditional terrorists tried to gain more legitimacy as well as their political goals by minimizing casualties, although they use brutal violence. Recently, however, terrorism has a greater purpose in expressing anger. If possible, they would like to kill more people, and the political purpose is unclear. A prime example is the September 11 terrorist attacks. That's all.
Okay. And this is the last chance for anyone to ask a question to Khan. Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay. Pro has the last word.
Okay. For the justification of Anjungan during the Japanese colonial era you spoke about, I agree that he was a hero to South Koreans, but that he had a strong will to bring forward national self-determination. But I feel sorry to say, but I think that this point of view is yet limited to we South Koreans, because while this event is not widely known to the global society, and the problem is that Japan did not admit what they have done in the past. So as long as this remains as our subjective view, I think it is hard to really convince Anjungan only as a freedom fighter to people of other countries besides South Korea. And about the Nazi Hitler you spoke about, of course, I think I agree that his actions were quite radical, and I, it could be seen as bad, but what he did was dictatorship. Not, I didn't see it as a kind of terror, but rather the German people loved Hitler, and Actually, he was a good leader to the Germans, although he was a global criminal to the international society. I think that terrorism and dictatorship is kind of a different thing. It could be sorted in different concepts, I think.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? Anybody have a question for Pro? And if not, then let me go back to the debate and ask you first, who won the debate? So please vote on who won the debate. And of course, this is anonymous. So we'll do that for 15 seconds. And so that's 7 voters or 6 voters, 6 voters, okay. And then we vote on the next one is please grade the debate. Again, that's anonymous. Okay, so there you see the results. And so, to follow on with this topic, let me see if I can find something which I really would have to look for. Let's see if I can find it very quickly here in my notes, but I might not be able to. Definition of terrorism. And so we go to, see if I can find it here. All right, moving down a bit to, yeah, maybe, I don't know, it might be too much to try to find here. Okay, here's a definition of terrorism, which is from a textbook on international law, a really great textbook on international law, but it's quite old by now. So just so you know, there is a legal definition for terrorism. And let me see again. I thought I opened that, and I don't see it here showing up on my screen, but I think you can see this, right? So let me make sure this is the legal definition of terrorism. And I think that's it. Why doesn't it come up? Can you see that? International legal, yes, says participants can now see your application. So this is taken from Antonio Casese's International Law from 2005, so it's 16 years old. But he says that the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution by consensus. So this is an international law book. This is not a political science book. This is not a human rights. I mean, this is, well, it is a human rights book, but this is not, this is an international legal definition of terrorism. And international law is made by states, and states tend to defend and maintain the status quo, right? The states that exist want to keep the world the way it is. So if the Japanese Empire exists, the Japanese Empire is going to condemn anyone who wants to break up the Japanese Empire. Or if American hegemony exists, Americans generally are going to resist actors that are challenging American hegemony. But so this is the international legal definition of terrorism. But keep in mind, international law is inherently conservative. It's inherently biased towards maintaining and defending and explaining what exists, not changing what exists. It tends to oppose militants that want to overturn the international political established order. So the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution by consensus on December 9, 1994. This is resolution 4960. It contained a declaration which the US General Assembly annexed to it with a provision, paragraph 3. What is terrorism? Criminal acts intended or calculated to provoke a state of terror in the general public, a group of persons or particular persons for political purposes, are in any circumstance unjustifiable, whatever the considerations of a political, philosophical, ideological, racial, ethnic, religious, or any other nature that may be invoked in order to justify them. And consequently, this provision, according to Antonio Cassese, this dead professor who wrote this textbook, consequently, this provision sets out an acceptable definition of terrorism. And its three main elements are the following. One, under most legal systems, the acts must constitute a criminal offense. For example, murder, kidnapping, arson, etc. Two, among the public or particular groups of persons, the acts must aim at spreading terror. And three, their motivation must be political. If terrorist acts fulfill these conditions, and in addition they are very serious or large scale, then regarding them as international crimes is necessary. So the general revulsion against this crime, as statements and declarations of many states demonstrated, warrants the conclusion that any state has legal entitlement to bring to trial the individuals whom they allege to be the authors of such acts of terrorism